Well, welcome to the FFF Podcast. I'm Jim Hochberg, going to be here with Eva Andrade. Today, we're going to talk about those shiny things over there that get our attention, that take us away from other things we otherwise would be pursuing. We're going to talk about that. You ready?
We're ready.
So that shiny object analogy, I think, comes from fishing, because fishing lures are often shiny things with hooks behind them, and the shiny thing gets the fish's attention, and he goes to eat it. He gets hooked. Now he's got to follow the fishing line all the way to the boat.
Is that why women like shiny, sparkly things like diamonds?
No, I think that's a totally different.
Okay.
That's totally different.
But I will tell you that if a girl walks in the room wearing diamonds and it's sparkling, all eyes will go to that sparkling
Okay,
item.
but we don't care about that.
Okay.
So,
He's mad, smoking like a true male.
but the point about the fishing analogy is when the fish bites the hook behind the shiny object that distracted it, it's pulled away from everything else in the water. Maybe it's other food to eat, it's baby fish, it's spouse fish, sharks, whatever. And for the fish, it goes with the line into the boat, into the frying pan, and into the stomach. So that's it for the fish. But that analogy about getting our attention and taking our attention away from other things that we could be noticing happens a lot in the media. And so what we want to talk about today is in a particular news story about the indictment of Donald J. Trump recently, what got lost, what got dropped out of the news because so much attention was put on that shiny object. And the Federalist Society actually published an article where they came up with 6 or 7 other news items that got lost, choked out of the storyline because of the shiny object of the indictment. And, you know, some people look at the indictment and think, oh, great, Trump's finally going to prison. And other people look at the indictment. I looked at the indictment as a lawyer, and it's like really not even an indictment. There's a lot of missing things in it that would otherwise make it an indictment. But anyway, what Eve and I are going to do today is talk about a bunch of stories that the Federalist Society pointed out should have been, because they're very important, considered in the news, but they were drowned out by this Trump indictment thing.
And this is just 7 that we're going to call to attention. There are probably
there's millions.
numerous
Yeah.
others.
Probably
so,
innumerable.
wherever you're watching this from, whether you're watching it locally here in Hawaii or if you're on the mainland, I challenge you to go check your local news stories and see what might not be being covered because they're focusing on this. And I recently saw on Fox News where they were saying that if you compare certain TV stations, they'll say this one talked about that a million times and this one didn't. So I like it that we're doing
like
this.
Media Research Council or something.
Absolutely, yes.
So the hopefully after we point out these various stories that we only have time for, the main point is don't let the shiny objects in the future distract you from the important stuff. So the first topic is the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives, was having a hearing about the weaponization of the federal government against the citizens, because the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights establishes how the federal government is permitted to operate. And it is not constitutionally permitted to operate outside of those bounds. And so because of the Twitter files, a lot of actual admissible evidence in the Twitter accounts of various government officials has been made public. And it's proving constitutional violations, and we're going to talk a little bit about them. So first of all, there was testimony at the hearing, as hearings always have. These people come up, sit at a table across from all the congressmen, and they answer questions and have their opening statements and all that. So Jeff Landry, the Attorney General for the state of Louisiana's Department of Justice, testified. And it was the Select Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government in the U.S. House of Representatives. This was on March 30th, 2023. And he starts out by, which I thought was a perfect place to start, explaining that the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And what did the Twitter files show, and how did those files become obtainable by Mr. Landry, the Attorney General? So they filed a lawsuit in Louisiana because of the suppression of First Amendment rights through the government doing certain things that they're not allowed to do. So he tells this committee that the lawsuit that his office filed on behalf of Louisiana and the American people, they uncovered and I'm just going to read parts of it because he writes really well, uncovered a censorship enterprise. So not limited examples, but an enterprise, which means an organized effort on a big scale. They uncovered a censorship enterprise so vast, it spans over a dozen significant government institutions, including the White House, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the Department of State's Global Engagement Center, National Institute for Health. So publicly, these federal actors justified their abridgment of free speech in the name of, quote, protecting the public against misinformation and disinformation. So he testifies at great length, actually, about all the different things that, and not in specific detail, because he sent the lawyer that actually was doing the case to talk about those things. So Jeff Landry set it up. We have this huge enterprise across a vast number of U.S. government organizations violating the First Amendment. So then he had John Sauer, well, he didn't, but the committee did. And John Sauer, his name is D. John Sauer, so maybe like David or Dennis or something. I should talk. I'm Lloyd James Hoper. So he's a special assistant attorney general for the Louisiana Department of Justice under Mr. Landry, but he previously served as the Solicitor General of the state of Missouri, and then the Attorney General, and now U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt. So he's worked in a bunch of different states and a bunch of different pretty high-level stuff. He says that since May 5th, 2022, it's a year almost, he served as litigation counsel in this case, Louisiana, Missouri, and other states versus Biden, which they call Louisiana versus Biden, pending in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Louisiana. In that case, on July 12th, the court authorized expedited preliminary injunction-related discovery, which means his team was able to force other parties to give documents that they could then read to put their case together, into the communications between a limited number of federal officials and social media platforms relating to disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, or any form of censorship or suppression of online speech. And he says that there were a veritable army of federal officials who pressured, threatened, coerced, colluded with, demanded, and deceived social media platforms to censor online speech. And then he gets into the specifics. He says by the numbers, which is pretty incredible. The federal officials were flagging social media posts by ordinary Americans for censorship because they didn't like the information that people were sharing. And that's the point. This is a huge story. And Eva's got a couple of other of the testimonies that she's going to share about. Still with this one, and we'll move on to a couple of the other ones.
Yeah, and we want to encourage you guys to actually take time out of your very busy schedules to read these guys' testimonies, because as Jim mentioned, you're not going to hear this in too many places. And what you will hear, if you do hear it at all, is going to be some talking head's idea of pulling things out of there to make whatever point that they're trying to make. So I think that sometimes to see these testimonies in full, you get a better idea of what they're trying to say.
In fact, before you go to the next testimony, this same guy, what's his name? John Sauer. He says that Twitter disclosed 84 officials. Facebook disclosed 45 officials. They handed over 20,500 pages of documents. 20 White House officials were involved. There was this election integrity partnership, academics and stuff. They surveilled 859 million tweets. They tracked 21,897,000, almost 22 million tweets on tickets as misinformation in 2020 alone. So the Virality Project, a mass surveillance censorship operation conducted by the same groups, tracked 6.7 million engagements on social media per week, or in 7 months, 200 million social media posts. So this is not a small problem that should not have been overshadowed by the silver shiny object of the Trump indictment. But go ahead.
No, and I love that these testimonies have major footnotes. Like
Yes.
you can double check where they're getting their information. And you know what? We should. I don't know about Jim, but I can tell you I'm a human being that makes mistakes all the time. So, you know, if somebody's going to submit testimony, you want to double check if you have the opportunity to do it. So the two testimonies I'm going to share, one is the actual testimony that kind of agrees with a lot of what Jim is saying. The next one I'm going to share after that is one who disagrees. So we want to be fair and make sure we get that. So this testimony is from U.S. Senator Eric Schmidt, and he goes on to say that he's had the honor and the privilege, right, to represent the state of Missouri, and he was the one that launched the Missouri versus Biden lawsuit, and so that's why he's here to give. And I love it because he starts his testimony with, he's like a Jim Hochberg wannabe. He does this whole thing about the importance of the freedom of speech.
So it's probably reversed.
It's and he talks about he goes that in the early days, he says, long before the Revolutionary, this is why I thought of you. I thought, oh God, he's going back to the Revolutionary War. But he says that more than 1,200 times before 1700, the British prosecuted Americans for what they called seditious speech. And then, of course, he gives examples of this, right? And
but we need to realize this is really not a topic of conversation. This is serious business. If our government can do this, we've lost our liberty.
No, and and that may be why he's making the tie into that, right? Because obviously we realize that this speech isn't really seditious. And when you look back at some of the examples he gives, if somebody's mad because you didn't, milk their cow properly or whatever, right? That's seditious
But
speech.
protesting at the Capitol on January 6, 2021 was not an insurrection, but they will call it that and use the law against you.
You know what, Jim?
It's serious.
But today we are living in a time where words don't have the meaning that they had anymore. And we did a show 2 years ago where we talked about that, where when you take a word and you make up all these new things. I mean, I feel sorry for English teachers today because I don't know how they do it. But anyway, he quotes, and I want to share this because I love this, right? So he talks about how the founding fathers realized how important having the freedom of speech is, right? And he quotes Justice Brandeis. And I love this quote, and it says, "It is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination, that fear breeds repression, that repression breeds hate, that hate menaces stable government, that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed grievances and proposed remedies, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsel is good ones." And I was like, oh, I want to read some of the old stuff now because that's when words meant what they said they were going to. So anyway, he starts with that. And then he goes into Biden's efforts to censor speech. And he gives several examples. And he talks about how in Biden's White House, what they're trying to do is reform Section 230. And we're not going to get into detail on that. Maybe we should do a show on it because it's important.
That is a whole show.
It talks about tech platforms and what they currently have as protections as being a tech platform. But then he gives all these examples. And so I just want to share a couple. He talks about the Hunter Biden laptop. He talks about the COVID-19 lab theory. He talks about the efficacy of masks. And these were the catalysts for the way these companies came in to say, oops, you cannot do that. And so that's kind of what his testimony is. And then he gives examples of actual statements by White House people saying things like, please remove this account immediately, right? And he quotes where he got that from. Things like looking out for your game plan on tackling vaccine hesitancy spread on your platform. So very clearly directive. Now, going back to the next testimony that you want me to share, though, this is coming from Matthew Seligman, and he starts off, and now this guy has credentials up the yin yang, okay? He's a fellow.
I don't think you can say that.
Well, I am saying it.
Yin yang is a Chinese derogatory something, I'm sure.
Okay, there is good and there's bad, and
Sorry.
that is not derogatory. I mean, as far as I know, there's still good and evil. But anyway, so he's a fellow at the Constitutional Law Center at Stanford Law School. He also held academic appointments at Harvard Law School, Yale Law School, and Benjamin Cardozo School of Law, right? So, and his scholarship, he claims, it focuses on constitutional law. So this guy is no low
But he's at Stanford, which is where the students just booed down a federal judge.
Well, he goes off right away to say that what he's claiming all these other people are saying, he says, and I quote, that contention lacks a reasonable legal and factual basis, and it threatens to undermine efforts by social media platforms to combat the grave and growing threat posed by misinformation on issues ranging from public health to election integrity.
So if he's that much of a First Amendment guy, he shouldn't take that position. What he should say is, we want more speech, not less speech.
Well, when you read his entire testimony, and like I said, he goes through background. I mean, he does very scholarly writing in his testimony. And so I encourage, if people want to see the other side of this, of what they're saying, is that he really, and this is the Eva Andrade, bring it down to normal level. What he really tries to do is say that what they were doing is working with experts in the field. So in other words, the Biden administration are not health experts. So they had to talk to the health experts to make sure that there was not misinformation being pushed out there.
And the whole point is, why is the government doing it? Not why are the health experts in the private sector, why is the government doing it?
Well, and then deciding, the thing is, if it had been, in my opinion, so after reading this, if after looking at everybody, what they were tweeting about and what they were saying, if they can clearly articulate why something is misinformation, then I want to hear it. But to just claim that something is misinformation and shut it off, so you can't double check, you don't know. I think that's where we went wrong, because I think we give too much credit to,
well, actually,
to the government.
The litigation is against the federal government. It's not against Twitter or Facebook,
right,
because they are not the government, and we do not have free speech rights with the private sector.
Right, but what he's saying is that the government wasn't the one saying that's bad information. They were working with experts who were saying that's bad information.
But they were requiring the enforcement
but that's what he's saying
thing.
Didn't happen. He said there are no instances in all of these millions of examples. There's not one case where they were threatened with some kind of...
Well, we'll see how the litigation comes out, because that'll be the answer.
And that is true. That would be the crux. If the government said, if you don't take this down, we're not going to fund this particular effort or whatever, then they're going to be found guilty of doing that. If they didn't do that, then it's going to be a whole different conversation. That's what he's saying. He's saying that never happened. There was never any case of that.
So I'm going to move on to number 2, because we've got 9 minutes left.
Okay, go for it.
So I'll do number 2, which was the story that the shiny object kept out of your consciousness. That Chinese spy balloon, remember, we all heard before the Trump indictment, it was unmanned, it was a weather balloon, it was, this, that, and the other thing. During the breaking of the Trump indictment, the news came out that it was actually the Chinese government controlled the speed, the direction, and it was actually in real time sending signal intelligence, not photographic intelligence. Signal intelligence, according to the articles, is useful for weapon systems and communication, not just pictures to see what things look like. So we should know about that stuff. It should have been in the news, and it got drowned out by this shiny object.
Well, and especially because what we were hearing then and what we're hearing now about the balloon are two different things.
Exactly.
So that's definitely why. So another story was the OPEC oil cuts. That was a big thing where the Saudi-led the oil cartels, right? They had a decision recently to cut oil production quickly. Now, what people don't know is how is this going to affect your pocketbook, right? So
supply and demand.
It went up about $5 a barrel, which is a 10 to 15% increase.
So when the supply goes down because they're cutting the pumping, then the price goes up.
So in this economy, just know that this might affect your pocketbook. Now, what some pundits are saying, though, is this is going to work right into the hands of some people who think that when it comes to the debt ceiling shutdown, that this could be one of those things that becomes a bartering issue. So it may end up benefiting them in the long run, having this increase. We'll see.
What's really interesting is a lot of economists think the value of the American dollar, because it's the reserve currency used for trading oil and stuff, that in some sense it's really called a quote unquote petrodollar. Mm-hmm. And anyway, we'll talk about that in another one of these articles. So I'm now going to talk about the other story that we didn't get to notice because of the shiny indictment of Trump. The border crisis goes global. So this is where we want to put the chart up, because the U.S. Customs and Border Protection put up this colorful chart that showed from 2020 through the end of February, March 3rd, actually, 2023, what the encounters by month at the northern and southern borders were. And you can see that the red line at the very bottom is 2020. So that's when Donald J. Trump was president, and it was about 650,000 encounters. In 2021, it went up to doubled, about 1 million. I got to put my glasses on.
So you can definitely see the difference between the red
it went up
and the
to
blue
2
lines.
million. It went from 650 to 2 million. In 2022, it went up to 2.7 million. And so far, the first quarter of 2023, it's already almost 3 million. And what they're finding, though, is not just that there's this giant increase, but now in 2023, there are a lot of Chinese illegal immigrants that they're catching. So they're assuming there are more that they're not. And what's important about that is China is very aggressively attacking the United States on many fronts. This is now another. And that we didn't get to notice because shiny objects took our attention away. So you want to go ahead and do your next one?
Yeah, so Russia's arrest of an American journalist was also something that it got a little bit of attention, but not as much as it should have. When we think about all the attention that Brittany Griner got, you remember
exactly.
that?
Daily.
Oh my God, we heard it every day. But, here we have a Wall Street Journal reporter, Evan Gershkovich, who he gets detained, right? And some people are calling it a kidnapping because it's that serious. And this is a serious thing. And I think that we need to be just as on top of that as we were on top of the Brittany Griner situation, because this is an American citizen. And I had to laugh when I was looking at some of the other news stories. There was, I can't recall who it was, but one of the talking heads actually said, oh, well, under, the strength of President Biden, people know not to mess with us like this. And I almost dropped my coffee cup because I thought, whether you like him as a president or not, I don't think too many people think he's a super strong president. I don't know. Maybe,
Some
if you're
people
watching
might.
this,
Some people
if you're
might.
watching this and you think he's a strong president, then comment below. We want to hear from you if you think he's a strong president, and tell us why.
But some people also think that technology came to the cavemen from aliens from outer space.
We want to hear from you too. Write that on the bottom. Anyway.
So my next one goes back to that petrodollar thing. The story was the different countries that are no longer going to use the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency internationally when they're doing international trading. And there were two stories that came up. One was that India and Malaysia are going to use the Indian rupee to do their international trading. And the other one was that China and Brazil finalized an agreement not to use the dollar and to use their Chinese yuan to exchange. And why does that matter? Why is that important? Well, because the United States has been printing all this money. We have this deficit. We have the debt ceiling question because the Federal Reserve was given the power after 1971 to control the economy. And they control the economy by creating money for the government to spend. And the reason it happened in 1971 is President Nixon took us off the gold standard. It used to be that currencies were backed by something real,
it used
a commodity.
To be back in the day.
A commodity. In
Yeah.
America, it was gold. And then it became what's called a fiat currency, which means its value is what the government says it is. And the United States has greatly benefited for decades being able to say our dollar is very, very valuable because it is the reserve currency that every other country uses to do international trade. And the reason it has value is we are able to sell treasury debt to other countries. So China holds a bunch of treasury debt. Russia holds a bunch of treasury debt. European countries own. And that is how we're able to have value in the dollars that we're printing. As these countries now are ditching the dollar as their international currency of exchange, if that keeps going and all the dominoes fall and the U.S. currency, the U.S. dollar is no longer the reserve currency, what's the value?
Well,
What's the value?
and this
story got hidden by the shiny object of the Trump indictment.
And that it connects very nicely with the whole commerce banking situation that's going on too. So and that's another one. We're not going to talk about that right now, but that's another one that's coming down the pike. We're going to have to do that.
So in the last minute, quickly hit your last one.
The murder of the Russian blogger. I mean, this Vladimir Tatarsky, a Russian military blogger. He was in a cafe in St. Petersburg. He was doing some kind of a presentation, and some of the rumor is that he was given like a little gift thing, and then it blew up, and many people in there died. And now it's like, okay, what happened, and all of this coming. But again, we need to be talking more about these people that are losing their lives in situations like this.
So if you were a fish and you wanted to become an old fish, what you don't want to do is go after the shiny object because you become a dead fish. So in terms of the show today, what we want you to do, avoid those shiny objects. Why don't you close this out?
Yep. Make sure you check all the links that are on the bottom of the YouTube page. Like, subscribe, share, hit that notification button so you know every time we upload a new video. And share this video with your friends so that Jim and I can talk to more than 36 people. That'd be great. Don't you think that'd be great?
Oh, I don't like talking to more than one person at a time.
Okay. Anyway, have a super great day, and we will see you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.